Happy Monday, everyone. So, picking off where we left off from last week around the 11 ways to take drama out of your life, which is to recognize and to deal with the cognitive distortions that we're all guilty of. So, if you didn't catch any of last week's posts, basically, cognitive distortions are basically where we put a broad brush over everything. Like things like my whole life is a hot mess because, one or two things aren't quite going the way that you had intended, right? And, when we think about it, we know already that a lot of the things that we're saying out loud are actually not true. And they're thoughts that kind of feel true, particularly in the moment, but they aren't. And look, if you have thoughts like this, well, everyone does, right? So there's nothing wrong with you. And the cognitive distortions are just, an interesting way that the brain actually works, right? So our brains are wired to protect us, right? And so the way that it thinks to do that is to over-focus on perceived threats and negativity. And of course, in this world of high distractions, huge workloads, and all that sort of stuff, we might not have saber-toothed tigers hiding around the corner, but we certainly do have a lot of distractions, and things that can cause us harm, right? So we tend to focus on that. We tend to make judgments only with partial information because the brain is lazy, basically likes to use most of our calories in a day, and it likes to use them sparingly. And it loves to overgeneralize, taking facts about a certain, single specific situation and applying it to everything, because our brains hate uncertainty, and unfortunately uncertainty is pretty much the only certain thing in life other than death and taxes. Unfortunately, taxes. Anyway, point being is, while they're normal, they do create a lot of unnecessary stress, and obviously you're not going to be able to get rid of them entirely, but when we recognize it, it can help us to manage the anxiety and the stress that comes around it, right? So if you're often feeling annoyed, anxious, or stubbornly pessimistic, then you're probably entrenched in a lot of these thoughts. And so the good news is that the things that you're perceiving or feeling to be not so great potentially aren't as bad as how you're kind of perceiving them. So your thoughts need some adjusting. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if you've got some trauma and stuff like that, it's just like think yourself positive. It's not one of those sorts of things, right? It fully recognizes that there's some deeper issues, and usually on a subconscious level, and sometimes we need to work through on that, but that's a hard place to start. So just becoming aware of our cognitive distortions is the first step in terms of recognizing that potentially we have something that needs to be resolved within ourselves, right? And so cognitive behavioral therapy was developed by Dr. David Burns. And so he came up, and he's the author of a book called Feeling Good and Feeling Great, which is on my to read, or rather listen, because who's got time to read right now, books, right? And we went through the first kind of 8, maybe 9 cognitive distortions. I think 8 actually, because I'm going to do the last 2 today. Sorry, I'm going to do 2 today and then 1 more tomorrow. So of course, as I said, once we become aware of our thought distortions, it helps us to see things a little bit more clearly and potentially reduce the stress, but also recognize that, right? So then we can stop focusing on the thoughts and focus potentially on a path forward. So let's keep an open mind and go for number 9 and number 10. So number 9 is labeling. So this is where instead of saying I made a mistake, you apply a global label to yourself and say I'm an idiot or I'm a loser because you failed at something. And usually that happens when you try something the first time. And it also stops us from trying new things like getting into the gym and that, because we feel like we don't belong, right? When you or others make mistakes, you attribute the problem with you or another person's character. So, you then make a moral judgment about them, or perceive a flaw potentially in your own or someone else's character or behaviors, instead of an isolated thought or behavior error, right? And when you label, you confuse who you are with what you do. And this leaves a very little room for normal learning curves, missteps, or human imperfections, right? Because just because you make one mistake, my point being is that you might accidentally forget to pay something once. But if you do that once, that doesn't make you a thief, right? But if you continue to make conscious decisions around not paying for items and pilfering from the shops, then that makes you a thief, right? So it's the continued behaviors or a pattern of behaviors that would potentially label you as being something that you're not, right? And so examples of labeling. Did you see that guy run a red light? What a jerk. I can't believe I cried in front of my trainer. I'm such a basket case. Ugh, I ate too much pizza. I'm just a worthless, undisciplined failure or piece of shit, right? We've all been there. And number 10 is personalization. So this is where you imagine you're directly responsible for other people's feelings and responses. I'm just going to put my hand up right there. I used to do that when I was younger. And take everything as personal commentary on your value as a human. And this is particularly easy as well if you have a parent that has particularly negative disposition. Anyway, we'll move on. So when we do this and we assume that everything goes wrong because of you, you're actually more likely to overlook the actual cause of the problem, preventing you from learning and growing, right? So quite often things happen. They don't happen to us. We just happen to be there, right? So, and a lot of times we confuse that as something being a personal attack on us, and that's when we get our back up, and that's when we start to look at the solutions and potential way forwards, right? So examples of personalization include, my kids' grades are low, I must be a terrible parent. This diet is driving me nuts, must be because I just don't have enough willpower. Now that is a classic one, and obviously if you've caught any of my woke willpower or things on discipline, we talk about the fact that that's not necessarily the case, and that you actually don't need that much willpower or discipline to follow a diet, and we can take the personalization out of that process and then help you to actually get better compliance. And then, another one, if I were a better coach, my gym wouldn't have had to have closed down. Okay, so tomorrow we have one more cognitive distortion to cover, and I'll also discuss some tips on how to manage that moving forward. For now, if you could just let us know in the comments any cognitive distortions that you've had today or that have been coming up through this blog series, that'd be great. As I said, the more we share, the more we can learn from each other, and as I said, no one's immune. So yeah, let me know what you thought, or what you're thinking rather, and speak to you tomorrow.